Today's video is part one in a three-part series in which I want to talk about something a little bit different than what we typically do here on the channel. Now, whether you've only been watching 2 or 3 videos or if you've been with me from the beginning, you're aware of the fact that the majority of what I talk about when it comes to men's style is the philosophical aspect of it. How it affects things like status and honor and tribe and taste and those different variables. But just because the philosophy is stuff that is super important and is not often covered doesn't mean that it's the only thing that matters. And as I get more and more knowledge and understanding of really kind of the mechanics and the science of men's clothing, I want to share that with you as well. And so today, and over the next 3 videos of this series, what I want to talk about is the difference between fit and proportions, because those two aren't necessarily the same thing. Okay, so think about it this way. Fit is kind of like handwriting. It's the ability to actually form letters with your hands. Now, handwriting is a crucial aspect of being able to write well, because if people can't read your chicken scratch, then the meaning of the words, there isn't none. It doesn't matter, because there's nothing actually conveyed by the symbols that you transfer over. So you've got the practical aspect of how your hand forms letters, which is exactly like the practical aspect of how the clothing fits your body. But when it comes to proportion, that's actually the formulation of words. Because when you think about it, the formulation of words, or the meaning of letters combined into different symbols, the creation of words, is where there's valuable. If you take a Y, a J, an L, and an M, and you put them together, it doesn't make a word, irrespective of how beautifully they're written. And so you need to have actual meaning behind it, and that's where proportion kicks in. Now, proportion is something that, from an artistic or a architectural, or really just from an aesthetic perspective, has existed and has been studied forever. It's something that exists in the most beautiful man-made creations, and it's something that exists in nature. And one of the biggest and strongest rules of proportion is the idea of the golden ratio, or the golden proportion. Now, my explanation of this isn't going to be super in-depth, because honestly, you could go and spend hours learning about all of this. But basically understand that the golden ratio, or phi, as the Greeks called it, is the idea that proportionality exists in nature and is the ideal form of architecture, art, photography even, and certainly when it comes to the way that our bodies are built. And you can really dive in deep. In fact, I will link to a video up here that talks about how in-depth you can get when it comes to phi and how that applies to all the different proportions of your body, the perfectly symmetrical face, or how your body should be built, or any of those other variables. Now, just for kind of like a brief overview, phi, or the golden ratio, is, do you remember the Fibonacci series from elementary school? Just a little bit of math. The Fibonacci series is 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, yada, yada, yada. Basically, you have a number, and when it's added to the number that precedes it, their total is the number that follows it. Now, I know that that could sound kind of, but think about it. If you have a line which is line A, and you divide it into lines B and C, if the total difference between line C and B is the same difference as A and B, then that's where you get the golden ratio. Basically, it's an irrational number, kind of like pi, and it roughly translates out to, I believe it's 1.618. Okay, math, history, all of that aside, what does that mean for clothing, and what does that mean for you? Now, to truly understand that, the best reference for this is Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. I'm sure that you've seen this before. Okay, so let's pull this up and take a look at it. He wrote out some scripts, and this really dives in deep as far as what the right proportion between the fingers are to a palm, and how many palms are in a foot, and how many feet are in a body. And yes, you can get that in depth when it comes to your clothing. But for the most part, what you're really only going to be looking at is some of the main variables and the main factors. So the 2 big things that we're looking for on this are going to be related to overall body height, and then also its width. Now, if you look at the Vitruvian Man, the center point, or is in the same distance, the equidistance from the bottom of the feet up to about the head, that center point is going to be right at the crotch. And for the most part, most of the time when you're looking at suits, that's what people tell you. That's the rule that I grew up with, is you want that even proportionality. From the top of your shoulder to the bottom of the jacket should be the same distance as the bottom of the jacket to the top of your shoes. Now the problem with that is that it divides you in half, excluding the head, and it doesn't always factor in the golden proportion or the golden ratio. With that, what you actually need to look at is not his crotch, but actually up at his navel. Now his navel is going to be that dividing line of where the golden ratio is, because the proportional difference in distance from the navel to the top of the head and the navel to the bottom of the foot is the same as the distance from the bottom of the foot to the navel as it is from the bottom of the foot to the top of the head. I hope that that makes sense. But essentially what that does is it puts the focus line right there at that point of the actual golden ratio. So that's how you deal with length. And then you get the same difference, or the same hopeful difference, between the breadth of the shoulders and the breadth of the waist. Hopefully the difference between those two is about that 1.618 or that phi. Now if you think about it, I know I'm certainly not built to the ideal proportions. You probably aren't either. I know my facial symmetry isn't right to the right proportions. I know that my body symmetry certainly is not. And yes, there are things that you can do to build your shoulders and to decrease your waist, but you can't make yourself any taller, nor can you make your legs any longer or any shorter, nor can you change the shape of your face or the placement of your eyes, or really a whole bunch of those other variables. And so it can be really easy to feel like, well, I'm never going to be the Vitruvian man, I'm never going to have the golden ratio, so why even bother trying? Or you can artificially mess with that by the clothing that you wear, the way that you grow your facial hair, the way that you have your hair trimmed, even the shape of the glasses that you put on your face. All of those things, when you look at things that are really flattering on somebody else, odds are they look really good on that person because they take somebody who is imperfect when it comes to that golden ratio and it brings them into that golden proportion. It takes them and makes them look more like they actually fit what those ideals are. Because we're trained to see that just naturally. We're programmed to see that. That exists in nature. You see it in leaves and seashells and dragonfly wings and so many other things. And that's the beauty of this, is it's not just a man-made thing. It exists in nature. And even if we can't quantify it, even if you're not looking at a seashell and saying, the beauty of that is so great because it is 1.618 blah, blah, blah. No, obviously, but you love the beauty of it because you can recognize the symmetry even if it's just subconsciously. So again, going back to your body, you can't change so many variables about whether or not your body fits the golden ratio. It sucks. But you can artificially change the perception of whether or not you're meeting that golden ratio by the clothing that you wear. Now, I believe that this is one of the reasons why the suit has stood the historical test of time for so long. Because the suit does such a good job when it is built correctly, when it fits properly, and it's made to the right proportions, of being able to get us to the golden ratio. It's the beauty of it. And that's why, even though, yes, suits have changed, lapels have gotten wider or have gotten narrower, jackets have gotten longer or have gotten shorter, things have gotten slimmer or have gotten baggier. You could even go back a few hundred years to like the 18th century and men were wearing frock coats and really tall collars, or all of these little minute details have changed, but the suit has lasted so long because overall it helps most men get to the golden ratio. So in part 2, we're going to break it down and talk about the trousers, where you should be wearing your pants, why you should be wearing them there, and how that actually affects the golden ratio. And then in part 3, we're going to be doing the same thing with the jacket. How to get the ideal jacket length, what to be looking for on your body so that you can get it there, and then concluding with that and showing how that all gets put together so that you could get the right proportions. Now obviously this applies to suiting, but it's going to work with your casual wear as well, especially because you can play with this irrespective of all these other philosophical things that we talk about, like your own personal taste, the tribe that you're in, the things that you want to communicate like respect or dominance or power or anything else. There's room for this. It works with all 3 of the archetypes. It works with everything because proportionality is something that is programmed into your brain for you to see and for you to appreciate. So you might as well start taking advantage of it. I can't wait to hear your guys' comments on this, and I'm excited to do parts 2 and 3. Leave your comments down here below. As always, please leave me a thumbs up. That really helps build the channel, and I will catch you guys on the next one.